Hello, and welcome to A Critical Dragon, where I talk about narrative in film, television, and in books. And you might have noticed a slightly different setup. Things had to move over Christmas time. I had friends coming, so my study got turned into a spare bedroom, and things got moved around. And when everything got repacked, it didn't fit back into the original configuration. So I'm still trying to sort out where the lights go, where the microphone goes. So things are going to be a little off. But Happy New Year to you all. Anyway, today, obviously, you can see from the title of the video, is Amiri Sue always bad? Is it always bad writing? Because I think it is almost universal. When people talk about Mary Sue's, they are derided, they are hated, it vehemently loathed by the vast majority of people, and almost universally called bad writing. And for the most part, yeah, okay. But and longtime viewers of my channel will know what I'm about to say here. It depends on the type of narrative. And for this, we're going to go back just very briefly because what where the term comes from is quite revealing about what a Miri Sue actually is. When we go back to early fanfic, and we're talking about like the 1960s, early 1970s, there were a lot of fanfic stories being circulated in fanzines and between fans, where someone would take a popular franchise story, Star Trek being the prime example that we're going to end up talking about, and they would write a Star Trek adventure, and they would write a character that was basically them, and they were the one who solves everything. They were smarter than Spock. They were more talented than Scotty at fixing the engine. They knew everything. They could do everything. They were loved by all of the other characters. They were the hero at the center of everything. And quite often they died sacrificing themselves for the ship, and they were mourned by Kirk and everyone else. And you could see that it was an author insert, and it was a we would describe it now as an adolescent power fantasy or an adolescent fantasy that it was all about flattering the ego and about the self importance of the author character. But in essence, they were characters that they might have had a flaw or one minor flaw that they had to overcome, but they were usually almost universally like beautiful or wonderful and hyper intelligent, and everyone loved them. They were the stereotypical chosen one who was going to save the day. They had very minor flaws, if any flaw, if they had flaws at all, and so they were the flawless chosen one. They were the center of the story. They were not only the main character, not only the protagonist, they were also hero, and the entire diegetic universe bent around them. That they were the center of the entire story world. So yeah, Captain Kirk might have been captain, but uh, Yeoman Johnson was the true heart of the ship, and everyone respected Yeoman Johnson or Ensign Cartwright or whatever. And the term itself, Mary Sue, came from it was a story, and it was Paula Smith, and it was sometime in early 70s, and I think it was 1973. And Paula Smith wrote a parody story where she created this character, Mary Sue, and it was an idealized female character making fun of this in other fan stories. She dialed it up to 11. The absolutely beautiful, perfectly flawless, amazing, wonderful, everyone loved this character. That's where it comes from. It comes from parody. And of course, that's the first big caveat to can a Mary Sue, is a Mary Sue always bad writing? Well, not when it comes to parody and satire, because in those circumstances, it is exaggerating for that specific effect to poke fun at it, in which case it can actually be quite difficult to do well. Comedy is hard. All comedians usually say this. And because of that, in parody, in certain satires, Mary Sue characters are actually not only appropriate, but add to the narrative. And if you think of, there's a whole spate of quite, well, let's just call them slightly juvenile films, like Not Another Teen Movie and Not Another Scary Movie. And like, there were a whole host of them, Not Another Superhero Movie. And they were a long tradition of this sort of satire of predictable genre tropes. And quite often there would be a Mary Sue character at the center of it because, and this is something I think we tend to forget. We think of Mary Sue's in the modern day as this is just bad writing and it's a character that doesn't have any flaws, that is absolutely perfect and can solve everything and everything comes easily to them and everyone likes them. It's just bad writing because blah. But Mary Sue's this type of character is actually part of a spectrum of well-established archetypes, particularly in genre writing. So if you think of the chosen one trope, the chosen one has a great destiny. The chosen one is the only one. They are super special. And they're the only one who can defeat the evil big bad. That is an element that is key to a Mary Sue. But the chosen one trope kind of stops short, hopefully, than descending fully into Mary Sue ridiculous levels. Being the center of the diegetic universe, being the center not only of the story, but everything around that story is based on them, is tied to them. They're the only one that can solve it. These are all things that we see in a lot of the fantasy and science fiction that we consume and like. The chosen one trope at its exaggerated end or the extreme end is where a Mary Sue is. But we also have it in forming the relationships within a narrative. So if you think when a quest group is formed, people naturally gravitate toward the central character. They're the heart of the narrative and they form friendships and bonds over time because they like the main character. You go, yeah, that's the Mary Sue element as well, but not to the same level. It's still present in its form, but not to the same degree. And that is something to be aware of. Characters who have special powers that they learn how to deal with quickly. We wouldn't describe if someone made a biopic about Mozart. Oh well, he's just a Mary Sue because he can just sit down and just plays, just comes naturally to him. You go, well, no, that's actually Mozart. But when we see it in fiction of a character who has a natural ability and doesn't need to work hard at training with it, they just seem to naturally get better at it over a short space of time. That's viewed as one of the characteristics of a Mary Sue. And yet we see a lot of that in fantasy and science fiction. And the difficulty is it's not any one of these things, and it's not even the combination of all of these things. It's the combination of a lot of these things to a certain level. It's a question of degree, not type. And of course, when we see it in TV shows, and this was something I had an issue with Star Trek Discovery, particularly the early seasons, far less so the later seasons. But in the early seasons, one of the things I reacted against and didn't enjoy was the fact that everything in that diegetic universe was tied to Michael Burnham. Michael Burnham turned out to be the secret adopted sister of Spock. Michael Burnham was the only one who saw the Klingon threat. Michael Burnham is the only one who could solve the Red Angel storyline. Michael Burnham, and again, over and over again, it wasn't Michael Burnham working as part of a team. It wasn't Michael Burnham being a character in the story. It was the story was serving Michael Burnham. And that is what was pushing that early form of the character toward Mary Sue status, even though Michael Burnham has flaws. She does. So she's not a flawless character. Michael Burnham knows a lot about certain things and, yes, is very talented in a lot of different areas, but still has to rely on other specialists. She doesn't know more than all the other specialists. So her knowledge isn't unlimited the way that a lot of the exaggerated Mary Sues are. And so I would stop short of calling Michael Burnham a Mary Sue character, but she's certainly leaning toward the top end of what you can expect with a chosen one central character, main protagonist, hero, with all of those different elements combined. She is at the very top end of what I think you could actually get away with before it becomes a full-blown Mary Sue character. And it certainly had harmed my enjoyment of the early seasons of Discovery. The latter half of the latest season of Discovery, I actually quite enjoyed, because they toned a lot of that back. There was more of a reliance on the other characters, and it wasn't constantly just Michael Burnham solving everything. But let's not get on it to a Discovery rant. I had problems with that show, and it didn't work for me, and there's no point harping on about that. But you can see that when we think of someone like Luke Skywalker. Luke Skywalker is a farm boy who has been flying around in basically his own little private plane. And then finds out he's actually the son of a great Jedi warrior, gets given a lightsaber, and within about a day has a blast shield over his face where he can't see anything, and is wielding this ancient weapon that he has had no training with, using the magical ability of the Force to deflect blaster bolts being fired at him, the little laser bolts being fired at him by the drone, and he can't see them, and he is moving essentially faster than light, because that's roughly physics in Star Wars is a bit weird, but he's doing this with no training. He just instinctively knows. And we have a roguish character in Han Solo who's a smuggler, and he's cutthroat and he's a career criminal, who in the space of about a couple of days is like, yeah, kid, oh yeah, you're a good pal of mine, I like you, I'm gonna risk my own life and my co-pilot's life and my ship and everything, I'm gonna come and rescue you because it's the right thing to do, and you're a good guy, yeah, you're great. Obi-Wan Kenobi, now obviously that this whole legacy gets built on, but Obi-Wan Kenobi, it's, oh yeah, this is who your dad was, and even though your dad basically turned to evil and was Darth Vader and was really horrible, I trust you with this and you're going to be fine. He instinctively likes Luke and sacrifices his life for Luke. Princess Leia sees this farm boy from backwards nowhere and ultimately, kisses him, likes him. It turns out that they're brother and sister. Bit awkward, but that's what happens when you retcon things in a story as you're going along. But even Princess Leia respects, likes Luke, and feels a bond toward him, naturally likes him. And ultimately, who can destroy the Death Star? Well, it's only Luke, using a mystical ability he's never trained with, that he just, does. And the whole universe or the galaxy is basically saved because of his actions, and he was the only one that could do it. You can see why you could actually construct a very compelling argument that Luke is a Gary Stew, a Mary Sue, male Mary Sue, Gary Stew. It's that character. It's quite a compelling argument, except we don't tend to view him that way. We tend to make excuses for him. Oh, well, he's not perfectly flawless because he's a wee bit whiny at the start. Yeah. At the very, very beginning, he wants to go into town to get some power converters and hang out with his friends. But once the whole story starts, like he masters the guns on the Millennium Falcon really quickly. He helps rescue a princess. They break into this, like they do all of these things, and you go, what? He is the chosen one trope. And that's what we tend to edge him into the chosen one territory rather than seeing him as a Gary Stew or a Mary Sue. And yet all of those elements are there. It depends on where we draw this line. But I started this by saying that obviously in some forms of narrative, a Mary Sue is fine. In comedy, parody, satire, that is one area. There is a major type of narrative and a specialist form of written narrative that I want to talk about now. So let's talk about the smaller one, the specialist form of written narrative. That is the choose your own adventure books, where you are the chosen one. You, the reader, are in fact the chosen one. You are inhabiting the character. You've been brought there, and quite often it's I remember, was it Warlock on Firetop Mountain or something in the Choose Your Own Adventure? And it's like Merlin has summoned your spirit into the book and you're making these decisions. And of course, no one cheated. No one ever cheated at choose your own adventure and looked ahead about five or six things to see if they made the right choice. No one ever did that. But in a lot of these, you, the reader, are in the story and you have these special abilities and you're the only one who can save the day. It is playing into all of those elements of the Mary Sue. And this brings us on to the major form of narrative in which Mary Sues are not only not bad, they're actually A, there by design, and B, it is a very important part of them being there. Because, as I said, Mary Sue's, what was initially conceived was these author inserts where people were putting themselves in the narrative to have this grand adventure where they were at the center, or at least their character surrogate was at the center and was loved and respected by all. What does that sound like to you? If you've ever played a role playing game, particularly a lot of the computer role playing games and console role playing games, that is at the heart of the design of main characters in a lot of these things. The central protagonist, particularly if it's one character that you play and then you have your team around you. But the central protagonist is often a chosen one. They're the only one that can do this. They have a group of disparate characters that, despite their strange backgrounds, all come to love and respect you very, very quickly. That these might be famous people with all sorts of powers, but they defer to you to lead them. They might be generals and warriors and sorcerers of renown and great wisdom. They all defer to you. And that, when you are a player, that is quite obviously flattering to our ego, that we feel that we, the player, are important to the story. It is flattering to us. It engages us. It rewards us for playing because people kept saying nice things about our avatar, our sort of surrogate in the narrative. And it plays into all of those aspects of the Mary Sue. We are quite often a chosen one. We are quite often the most versatile, the most powerful, the most interesting character in the game, because while the other characters have predetermined sets to fit with a sort of design of party to build in flexibility for the player, we can often master additional things, and we master them very, very quickly. Things, spells that took sorcerers years to learn, we pick up by reading a scroll, memorizing it, and oh, look, we've leveled up and now can cast it. That a lot of these elements are built into the mechanics to immerse the gamer in the world. Other characters defer to us, other characters flatter us, other characters respect our opinion, because who wants to play a game where all the other characters are making the decisions and you just have to act them out? You want to take control. You want to be the one in charge. And in order to do that, quite often, the other characters are going to have to naturally defer to you so that you can make the decisions as the gamer. But when you think in narrative terms, that means that if you're a space marine or in command of space marines, the commander has been killed. You now have to take over the chapter house of these space marines and direct them on the missions. Really, but a bunch of these other guys hanging around, like he's been around for a couple of centuries. Shouldn't he be taking over? No, you're the player. You're important. Oh, look, it's a superhero game. We've designed this brand new superhero and all these other recognizable superheroes. Spider-Man, Doctor Strange, Iron Man, Captain America, Captain Marvel, they're all going to defer to you because you're awesome. You're going to lead them into battle because you are the player. And these are all elements of being a Mary Sue. These are all author inserts, but in this case, it's player insert. It is that element of us being in control of the narrative, that the narrative diegesis is being bent around us to raise us in importance, that we are the center of this narrative universe. And that is by design in a lot of computer games. And before you sort of ignore computer games or dismiss computer games as some sort of niche thing, remember that the computer game industry is significantly larger than the film industry. And that's a lot of eyes and ears and trigger fingers and console mashing buttons associated with this form of narrative. And because it is active and immersive, and it flatters us and helps engage us. That's why it's there. But it also shows why in more passive forms of entertainment, because film, television, and reading for the most part are less interactive. They are less active. They are more passive. Therefore, we don't have that same integration of who we are as reader or viewer that we do when we are gamer. And that is why something that works so well in a lot of computer games does not work as well or can be irritating in other forms of literature. So, to sort of summarize all of this, Mary Sue's generally reviled, hated the world over. They are not necessarily bad. Initially, we have to remember that the term itself came from a parody of this style of fan fiction, this style of character in fan fiction. And since then, it's kind of morphed into an exaggerated form of the chosen one trope. And because of that, a Mary Sue is not a separate classification of character. It is a type of character on a spectrum with main character and protagonist and hero and chosen one and all of those elements. And it is separated only by degree, not by type. And because of that, there are circumstances, even outside parody, satire, and comedy, where a Mary Sue can be very deliberate, good, engaging, and essential to the narrative. And that is in interactive narratives, particularly computer games. And so that's why I so often say it depends on the narrative. When people say this is always bad, sometimes you can think up a niche case or a corner case or some sort of edge case that kind of disproves it, disproves the only part. But in this circumstance, there is an entire industry that one of the cornerstones of the narrative writing involves the utilization of this very thing as integral to the construction of a successful narrative. And so when people say Mary Sues are always bad, I can't help it. I wince a little because it's forgetting about other types of narrative. And that's why, it's why I talk about narrative on this channel, not just books, because narrative and writing are not just a single thing. There are all sorts of different ways that they are utilized. And I think it's important to remember that. But anyway, thank you very much for watching. Thank you for your continued support, and I'll see you in the next one.